Most Americans will suffer from some sort of stress. And no, I'm not talking about just any type of stress. I'm talking about moderate to high levels of stress. The American Psychological Association did a survey. They found that 3/4 of adults just in the last year alone said that their stress levels have increased. Now, stress can be a complex and confusing topic. So, what exactly is stress? Well, stress is defined as any sort of internal or external stimulus that creates a biological response. So anything internally or externally that causes a biological response in your body is defined as stress. And the thing that causes that stress is called a stressor. So the stressor will cause the stress. There are 3 types of stressors. And we all know about the first one, which is emotional. That's the most obvious type of stress. But there's 2 others. There's also a functional stress, which is what you're doing. So if you're working out in the gym, that's a functional type of stress. And the third one might be surprising. It is ingestional stress. Yes, what we are eating and also us inhaling. Yes, I said that right. Inhaling will also cause stress. So we're going to talk more about those types of stress in detail later on. But what you got to know is all 3 of these types of stress will evoke the fight or flight response in your body. So the fight or flight response is your body's sympathetic nervous system. It is part of your body's ANS, or your autonomous nervous system. And this is part of your body that controls a lot of the physiological parts of your body. So this will control your heart rate, your breathing rate, your blood pressure, etc. Now, we've heard a lot of things about stress. We've heard that some stress can be good, some stress can be bad, and what can happen when we get too much stress. Like we've heard that if you have too much stress, it can lower your immune system and make you more likely to get sick. What I want to focus on more is how stress affects your nervous system. And I know we want to learn a lot about different tricks and stuff to lower our stress levels, and I'm going to definitely get into those. But I think we should definitely know what stress is doing to our brain, and this will help us come up with different tools, especially once you understand what's going on. So stress will affect our whole body. And if you look at just the brain, it can actually cause structural and functional changes to our brain, and also cause long-term effects with our nervous system. So one thing in particular that stress will affect is our memory. And it'll do this by affecting a structure in our brain called the hippocampus. Our hippocampus is very important for memories. And basically, the total function of our memory and converting short-term memories into long-term memories are dependent on our hippocampus. And one thing to note about our hippocampus is that it has the highest density of glucocorticoid receptors. You don't have to know what that means, but basically, when you have a stress response, your body releases more glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids are basically a steroid hormone, and they are released from our adrenal glands. So one type of glucocorticoid is cortisol. And a lot of us have heard this before, and they associate cortisol with stress. The reason they do that is because the primary stress hormone is cortisol. So the main type of glucocorticoid that is released in times of stress is cortisol. So just for the sake of this video, when I use the words glucocorticoid or glucocorticosteroid or cortisol, they all mean the same thing. They all mean stress. So if you have higher levels of cortisol, you have higher levels of stress. And if you have higher levels of stress, then you have higher levels of cortisol. So stress can actually change the shape of our hippocampus. And this is how it affects our ability to form new memories. And chronic stress is where it can get really bad. And when you have chronic stress, this can cause less neurogenesis of our hippocampus. Neurogenesis is basically the formation of new neurons. So if you have chronic stress, it's going to impede your ability of your brain to form new neurons that are specific to memory. And they actually found this in animal studies too, and they found that higher levels of stress will damage the hippocampus. It'll cause atrophy to the hippocampus, and this will affect these animals' spatial memory. So if you don't know what spatial memory is basically when you lost your keys and you can't find them. That is your spatial memory, when you can't remember the location of something. And they also found this in human studies as well. So they found that when your blood has higher concentration of glucocorticoids or this cortisol again, you get atrophy or damage to your hippocampus, and this can lead to memory disorders. So one example of this that we see is something called Cushing syndrome. basically what Cushing syndrome is when your body makes too much of this cortisol. And in response to these higher levels of cortisol, you get damage to your hippocampus and you get memory disorders. And there were also other human studies, and they found that if you give even therapeutic doses of glucocorticoids, this can also cause problems with your memory. So in a nutshell, what you got to know is if you have too high levels of cortisol, it can affect your memory. And therefore, when it affects your memory, it can also affect your ability to learn. Now, I don't want to get too black and white here because not all stress is bad. And stress has also been shown to improve our memory. So, for example, if you have to take an exam and you have that stress and you have to learn for that exam, that short or that small amount of stress can actually improve your memory for a short period of time. There was also other studies showing that impending stress right before learning, or if you add a little bit of stress right before you have to learn something, it can actually increase your memory power. So really when it comes down to stress, it comes down to a lot of different things, right? It comes down to the timing of the stress, comes down to your emotional connection to the stress, comes down to how intense the stress is. And this is why certain types of stress can be good. For example, procrastination can be a great motivator and a great type of stress to help you learn. You might be wondering why you always try to procrastinate things and leave things till the last minute. Well, the reason is that it's a great motivator and you turn very efficient because of that stress. So next time someone tells you that you're a procrastinator, you can just tell them that, no, I just function very efficiently with my time. So there are also further studies on animals and humans, and they found that when you administer this cortisol or this stress right after you learn something, it can help improve your memory. Now, at the same time, like I said, some types of stress can be bad. When it comes to retrieving memories or trying to remember something in the past, if you add stress right before that, then your ability to retrieve that information actually goes down. So if you have stress exposure right before you take a test, that could be bad because now it's going to be harder for you to remember things. And the reason for this could be because there's just all this competition of new information that's in your brain trying to compete at once, so it can be really hard to remember something. I don't know if you've ever tried to think clearly when you're really stressed out. It can be really hard, so this is why. So when it comes down to stress's effect on our memory, it's not so simple. It is very dependent on the time of the stress, the emotional connection to the stress, and the magnitude of the stress. So depending on those factors, your memory can be either better off or worse. So using this knowledge, this might be able to help you next time you have to prepare for an exam or something. If you have a little bit of stress right before learning, this actually could be good because the stress of knowing, for example, you only have 2 days left before an exam could help you, and that is what could keep you efficiently studying during that time. Now, it probably would be better to come up with an actual study routine, but now you know that if you are procrastinating, now you have a good excuse. At the same time, you should also know what not to do. If you're just about to take a test, right before that, you probably should not do something that will stress you out. Instead, you should probably do the exact opposite. And we're going to get into some techniques on how to lower your stress very soon. So one thing that we can all agree on is chronic stress is bad. And this is what I want to focus on in the rest of this podcast. So the thing with chronic stress is we're not just talking about an increase in cortisol anymore. Now we're talking about a whole range of issues like cognitive disorders that can happen and potentially even depression. So your cognition is basically your interpretation of your stimulus. So this includes your learning, your decision-making, your attention, and your judgment. So basically, your cognition is your process of getting new information and how you understand it. So an example of a cognitive disorder is ADHD and also dementia. So this is why I think it's very important to talk about chronic stress and ways to lower chronic stress. Now, the thing with chronic stress is it can get very complex. But the good thing is there are some simple tricks we can do to help lower it. When it comes down to chronic stress, it seems like we are way more stressed out now than our ancestors were. The reason is stress is something that was meant to be very short-lived. You're supposed to react quickly to a life or death situation. This is why it's called our fight or flight response. Now, there probably were things that stressed our ancestors out other than fighting off lions and tigers and bears, etc. But in general, this is what stress is supposed to be. The problem is today's stressors are full of these imagined dangers because they're full of these non-life-threatening situations where people tend to overreact to. But the problem is the biochemical and physiological responses in your body are going to be the same. Whether you're fighting off a bear or a tiger, or whether you're stuck in traffic and you're pissed off because someone just cut you off, both of those are going to cause the same fight or flight response in your body. And the problem is that one of those responses is justified and one of them is not. Because either way, your heart rate's going to go up, your breathing rate is going to go up, your blood pressure is going to go up. All of the things that happen in a stress response will go up. But it won't always be justified for the situation. For example, if you have to fight off a lion, God, I hope none of you have to do that. But if that were the situation, you would need that increased heart rate, you would need that increased blood pressure, you would need that increased breathing rate, because you have to either get out of that situation or fight for your life. But if you're sitting in traffic and you're just sitting in your car and you're mad at the person in front of you, you don't need all those increased biomarkers. And this is where it can become really unnecessary, and this is where it can become chronic stress. So this is the problem. And I think stress management tools are very important and very effective. And some of you might have your own that work for you. And I think that's very great. And I encourage that. So if you rely on music or therapy or spa or exercise or different hobbies, even meditation or yoga, spending time in nature, whatever it is, if it works for you and it's de-stressing you, make sure you keep doing it. But the thing is, like I said before, stress isn't just emotional. Remember I said there's 3 types of stress. First one is emotional, but there's also a functional stress, which is what you're doing. So if you have a high stressful job, like you're a construction worker or you're very, very physically active, or I just put you out in the cold or a very hot environment, all of those things are going to stress you out. And the third type of stress, like I mentioned before, is your ingestional stress. So what you're eating and also inhaling will also cause stress. We're going to get more into inhaling in just a little bit, but in terms of what you're eating, a lot of the processed foods, a lot of the chemical additives, and a lot of the crap that they put in our food now, studies are showing that this can also evoke some stress response in our body. So probably the first thing that your stress will change is your breathing rate. We talked before about how it affects your heart rate, your blood pressure, etc. But the first thing that will change is your breathing. And the cool thing about your breathing is you can always switch your breathing to manual mode. And when you switch it to manual mode, you can use some tools to help kind of trick your body to go more into a parasympathetic or a rest and relax mode. Now, I'm going to give you guys the first trick I have to help lower your stress levels. This is something that you can do right on the spot in real time. This will only take about a couple minutes. So normally what happens when we're stressed out is our breathing rate will go up and we'll start using our mouth to breathe and we'll start using just the upper half of our chest to breathe. The problem is this will put us into kind of never-ending cycle because you can just increase your stress response right now by hyperventilating and doing this quicker breathing. So instead, what you need to do is you need to only use your nose and you need to do a normal inhale, but a prolonged, exaggerated, slow exhale. So it'll look kind of like this. Now you probably looked at me like I didn't do anything, but that's exactly how it should look. You should do a normal inhale, but you want to do a very effortless exhale and make it very exaggerated and very long and longer than your inhale. And if you keep doing this and you keep the breathing really slow, in just about 2 minutes, you should start to calm down. Now, another thing you can do while you're doing this is put your hands on your lower ribs. And as you're inhaling, you want to feel your diaphragm kind of push your hands out. If your hands are not moving and just your upper chest is moving, then you're not doing this correctly. You want to make sure that you use your diaphragm, and the way to do that is to engage your belly and engage the lower half of your lungs. So once you start to see your lower hands start to move, or you kind of push against your ribs a little bit and you feel a little bit of resistance, that means that you're doing it correctly. Now, when you think about doing this, you might feel like that is doing the exact opposite of what you want to do, because you might feel like you need to take big gulps of air. But this is a really common myth. Really common myth is people, when they get stressed out, they want to take really deep, long gulps of air. So what they do is they take a big breath through their mouth like, oh. The problem is this is actually doing more harm than good. And ironically, it may actually lower your ability to get oxygen into your cells. Because basically what happens is when you're mouth breathing in general, you are taking these quicker, faster breaths, and you are depleting your body of a molecule called carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is a very important molecule, and without this molecule, we will not be able to deliver the oxygen that we get into our cells to go to our lungs. And no matter what, if we're taking these big breaths, we are getting a lot of oxygen into our lungs. But just because it goes to our lungs, it doesn't mean it's going to our cells. You can put one of those pulse oximeters on your finger and record your oxygen saturation levels, and that will record how much oxygen is attached to the hemoglobin once it gets into your lungs. But the hemoglobin has to be able to deliver it to all of your cells, and without enough of the CO2, it cannot do that. So just because your oxygen saturation levels are high, it doesn't mean that your oxygen is going to the right places. This is why hyperventilating and taking these bigger breaths are so bad for you, because your body doesn't need that oxygen. It needs more CO2. It has more than enough oxygen already. Also, in general, with mouth breathing, we tend to only use the upper half of our lungs. And when we do that, we also further enact the sympathetic nervous system. So we further kind of put us in this fight or flight mode or this anxious and stressed out mode. Instead, what you need to do is you need to use your nose and your diaphragm. And when you use your nose and your diaphragm together, you get air to the bottom half of your lungs. And side note, in the bottom half of your lungs, that's where the majority of your blood flow is. So it's going to help you even more breathe more efficiently and get that oxygen more efficiently to all of your cells. But again, the technique is going to be a normal, slow inhale and a very slow, exaggerated, long exhale. Now, you might be wondering also, why am I doing a slow, exaggerated exhale? Am I just doing it for fun? No, there's actually some science behind it. So in a nutshell, when you inhale, this will drive your sympathetic mode, and when you exhale, this will drive your parasympathetic mode. So basically, if you inhale more than you're exhaling, you will be more stressed out because you will put your body into a more sympathetic mode. Ideally, humans need to have a certain ratio because you want to have a good balance of both of these. So ideally, our ratio should be 40% of the time inhaling and 60% of the time exhaling. And that will put us at a kind of ideal balance. But the problem is that a lot of people who are chronically stressed out or chronically have these imagined dangers, especially people in the westernized society, they kind of live in reverse. So they have more 60% inhaling and 40% exhaling. And also what's interesting is this is actually the reason that we sigh. And this is the reason that we feel more relief when we sigh, because our body is basically forcing us to go into a more parasympathetic mode by forcing us to have an exaggerated exhale. Now, sighing in general is a sign that you are over-breathing. So if you ever catch yourself sighing, or if you ever see someone else sighing and they just sitting around, they go, it's a sign that, first of all, that they're stressed out, but also a sign that they are breathing too excessively. And in a nutshell, the reason is because when you are an overbreather and you're breathing too excessively, again, you're depleting your body of a molecule called CO2 or carbon dioxide. And one interesting thing about CO2 is our brainstem will kind of monitor our CO2 levels. And when they detect a certain amount of CO2, they will determine it's time to take the next breath. So if our CO2 levels start rising and they get up to a certain threshold, that's when our body will automatically take the next breath without us even thinking about it. But when we chronically deplete ourselves of CO2 by taking these quicker breaths, then our CO2 levels will start to drop. Our body, because our body has this sort of neuroplasticity, it will adapt to these lower levels of CO2, and it'll think that that's the new normal. So it'll start taking breaths quicker and quicker because it will not allow that CO2 to build up. Because normally our CO2 will build up when our body is just undergoing metabolism. We don't get it from the air around us. So our CO2 will build up basically when we're holding our breath. So the more we hold our breath, the higher our CO2 levels will get. And if we're breathing too quickly, then we're not allowing our CO2 levels to get that high. And then our body will adapt to that new normal. So we'll start taking quicker and quicker breaths and we'll be adapted to that lower level of CO2. So next time you have the urge to sigh, it would be better to resist that urge, because it may feel good in the moment because you're exhaling and getting rid of that CO2. But instead, if you resist the urge to sigh, instead you're going to be training your body to get used to a higher level of CO2 and get back to what's considered normal again. So a way to resist sighing is, one, just catch yourself doing it and don't do it, or every time you feel the urge to sigh, to actually swallow instead. And sometimes you might not catch yourself doing it. Sometimes you might sigh and go, like, oh crap, I just sighed. What you got to do then is just simply hold your breath. You just got to hold your breath for 5 to 10 seconds, and that'll kind of make up for that sigh and make up for that loss of CO2. Now, I know this can get a little confusing, but I'm going to make another video more about simply breathing techniques and things you can do to increase your CO2 levels and get healthier again. And I don't want to get too much into that in this video because I kind of want to focus on the stress part of it, and I don't want to get too divergent on it. But when it comes to prolonged exhales, there was another study kind of further proving that this prolonged exhales can work. So they took 10 healthy men between the ages of 21 to 28, and they put them under some stress by doing this spontaneous rapid breathing. So they activated their sympathetic nervous system. Then they had them all perform prolonged exhales. So they had them do 4-second inhales and 6-second exhales. So they got that 40 to 60% ratio. And the results were that their parasympathetic function was activated. And what happened was their heart rate variability went up and they started to calm down. So your heart rate variability is basically a measure of your nervous system balance. So in a nutshell, your higher heart rate variability means that you are less stressed out and means that more of your parasympathetic mode is activated. So they found that doing this prolonged exhale worked and it helped calm these people down. Now, another trick you can try, and this one might sound a little crazy, is left nostril breathing. Yes, I said that right. Just using your left nostril to breathe. Now, the reason that this can work is studies have found that your left and your right nostril are different, not just because they're on different sides of your face, but because the left nostril is more connected with your parasympathetic nervous system, and your right nostril is more connected with your sympathetic nervous system. And also, the left nostril will feed blood to the right side of your brain, and the right nostril will do the opposite. It'll feed blood to the left side of your brain. Now, if you don't remember, the right side of your brain is basically associated with creativity, and the left side of your brain is associated with more logic, language, and computing. So just by simply forcing yourself to breathe through your left nostril, you can put your body more into a parasympathetic mode, especially in times when you're stressed out. So ideally, we would have a balance with our body. And you want to make sure you have a balance. You don't want to be too much on one side versus another. And there was a study kind of showing that. So there was this schizophrenic woman, and they recorded her breathing patterns over the course of 3 years, a total of 1,086 days. And they found that over those 3 years, she had a significantly greater left nostril dominance. You might be thinking, well, she's schizophrenic. Why is she using her parasympathetic system more? Well, here's where that balance is so important. And what the study thought was going on was basically she was likely overstimulating the right side of her brain, that creative part of her brain. And as a result, she was making her imagination go kind of crazy. And over several sessions of training her to breathe through her right nostril and activating the left side of her brain, which is, again, that logical part of your brain, that she was able to experience far fewer hallucinations. Now, you might be wondering how the heck we can know that one side of our nostril will affect one part of our brain and another nostril will affect a different part of our brain. So we have something called nasal cycles, and these are actually part of our autonomic nervous system. So you might notice that occasionally the left nostril is a little bit more dominant, and then other times your right nostril is a little bit easier to breathe out of. That's actually normal. And usually this dominance will switch every 2 hours. And there was actually a study, and they were looking at people's brains. So they hooked them up to EEGs or electroencephalograms, and they were studying their brain activity during these nasal cycles. And what they found is when people were breathing through the right nostril more, it was going to affect their left hemisphere of their brain a lot more, and they were seeing that light up in the EEG a lot more. And same thing with the opposite side. When they were breathing with their left nostril, they had way more power with their right hemisphere of the brain in the EEG. So ideally, the human body should keep this in balance on its own, but sometimes it needs a little bit of help because we're too much on one side. So there's actually a technique even in yoga where they do nasal cycling, where they practice breathing through one nostril and they switch it. So just remember, left nostril, more parasympathetic and right hemisphere of your brain, and right nostril, more sympathetic nervous system, and left side of your brain. Just like breathing can affect our stress levels and stress levels can affect our breathing rate, Another thing that can affect our stress levels is thinking. Just like we could be over breathing, we could also be overthinking. And this is a real problem with a lot of people who are especially chronically stressed. So a guy I think did a really good job on shedding some light on this is a guy named Patrick McKeown. And he wrote a book called The Oxygen Advantage. And I think it's a very interesting book. You should definitely check it out if you have the time. But basically, one thing I think people are really not able to do is to take control of their mind. You might be wondering, what the heck am I talking about? But have you ever found yourself scrolling through TikTok or Instagram or those YouTube shorts? You might have come across mine. In that case, I don't blame you. They can get addicting. But if you ever catch yourself scrolling through those and not being able to stop, that's one example of not being able to control your mind. These things can get kind of addicting. Or you might find that your attention span has gotten really short and you might not be able to focus on something that long. Heck, I might be surprised even if you got to this far in the video. And if you have, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel below. But one simple thing you can do to help tackle stress and negative thoughts is to simply start paying attention to your mind and your thoughts throughout the day. How often do you think you actually pay attention to what's going on in your mind? Simply by doing this more, you can help tackle stress, and especially you can help tackle chronic stress. So there are two different types of thoughts. There are practical thoughts and there are distracting thoughts. Practical thoughts are useful thoughts and we actually need those, but distracting thoughts are what we want to get rid of. Those are doing the exact opposite and those are actually our useless thoughts. So an example of a practical thought is if you are preparing for something. So if you're creating a business plan or if you're coming up with certain strategies, or you're organizing some logistics, even if you're going on a vacation or something. Or also athletes will use this a lot. I played football in high school and we would spend a lot of time just coming up with plans for different teams that we were playing. These are very helpful. At the same time, distracting thoughts will do the exact opposite. And the problem with distracting thoughts is we're usually not aware of what's happening. And this is what I want you to change. I want you to try to become more aware of these distracting thoughts, because these distracting thoughts are what can cause tension and a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. So an example of a distracting thought is if you are in the shower and you start wondering, I wonder if those guys thought I was weird because of the way I said that one joke, or I wonder if I sounded stupid when I said that. Those are thoughts that will increase your anxiety and they serve no purpose. So we know that thinking is very important and we were definitely taught to think a lot. And a lot of people spend a lot of times thinking, especially like big CEOs like Steve Jobs. He talked a lot about how he spent a lot of time thinking. But overthinking can also be a problem. And this is something that we are not taught. So tricking your brain to sort of become not mindful, but mindless can be just as important as thinking. So there is a trick I want you to do. It's a 2-minute trick, so it won't take that long. You just got to pick a point at a wall and stare at it. Stare at it for 2 minutes without looking at your phone or doing anything, without thinking about anything. And I want you to jot down on a piece of paper every time a thought comes into your head about something. Every time you think about something and you get distracted, put down a tick on that piece of paper. I want you to see how many times in just those 2 minutes that you get distracted. Now, you might find that this can actually be really difficult. You might find the urge to look at your phone, might find the urge to check your text messages or check your Instagram. It can be really painful to look at a wall and do nothing for 2 minutes. Now, I want you to do this exercise every single day. Just spend 2 minutes looking at a wall every single day and jotting down how many times you get distracted or have another thought. These are the thoughts that I want you to get rid of. The less of these thoughts that you have, the more you will be able to focus and concentrate. Now, at the same time, throughout the day, I want you to be focusing on your thoughts as well. Periodically, just kind of check in and see what you're thinking about. Ask yourself, is what you're thinking about actually useful, or is it a practical thought? If you are logistically thinking about something, then it's okay to think about it. But if it's a distracting thought and it's something stupid or something, not stupid, but something you shouldn't be thinking about or something that's not helping you in any way, and it's stressing you out, these are the things that I want you to try to get rid of. So just being mindful of these thoughts and just being aware of these thoughts as it's happening can really go a long way in helping you reduce having these thoughts. Now, also, next time you have one of these negative thoughts, see what it's doing to the rest of your body. How is your heart feeling? Are you feeling anxious? How is your breathing rate? Has your breathing rate got up? Are you starting to breathe through your mouth again? Are you feeling kind of nauseous? These are all some changes that can happen by simply getting more stressed out. And these are some of the things that can contribute to having chronic stress. So the more you focus on this type of stuff, the easier it will get. And think of it kind of like a meditation or another branch of yoga. Increasing our ability to focus and concentrate can pretty much help us in every single aspect of life. I'm not just talking about preparing for an exam or studying for something. I'm even talking about if you are an athlete. For example, if you're a golfer, or if you've ever golfed before, you can see how important it is to concentrate. Because every single time you are driving or doing a putt, how many times have you done the exact same swing? But how come sometimes the ball will go straight towards the green, other times it'll go in the forest, or it'll go in the parking lot or something like that? It comes down to your ability to focus. This is something that really helped Tiger Woods when he was training to become a golfer. And this is something that his father, Earl Woods, really attributes to his success. So Earl Woods would actually use different tactics to increase Tiger's concentration. So what he would do is every time Tiger was practicing his golf swing, he would drop his golf bag or something like that. Or he would start shouting different things at him. All these things were helping improve his concentration so he could focus on what he was doing. There's also studies on U.S. Marines and just them being aware of mindfulness and how it can affect their ability to deal with stress. So they took 281 soldiers and they divided them into two groups randomly. One group actually received mindfulness training, the other group did not. After the training and after some time, they did some battle training in actual battlefield conditions. And they looked at their stress levels after, and they found that the Marines who actually did the mindfulness training, they had improved quality of sleep, they had reduced stress overall, they had also a quicker recovery of their heart rate and their breathing rate. And this was compared to the group that did not have any mindfulness training. And this was after intense combat training. And they found that after very intense combat, the Marines that did mindfulness training had improved quality of sleep, they had reduced stress overall, and they also recovered their heart rate and their breathing rate quicker. So you might think that when I talk about controlling your mind and conquering your thoughts, that this is kind of a waste of time, and it sounds kind of like meditation or some sort of yoga. And a lot of times, meditation will get a bad rep as a waste of time, and I used to think this too. But I think this notion has been changing, and it will continue to change more and more as people start to see the benefits of it. And one reason that I'm emphasizing this is that this mindfulness or this mindlessness training has even helped my own life. And I want to make sure I can spread this knowledge to everyone who will benefit from it. So practicing these simple techniques can help you conquer your mind and conquer those bad thoughts that pop in your head, and also, in turn, reduce your stress levels. If you look at the skulls of a pre-industrial human, you'll see that their skulls are way different than our skulls right now. But if you were to find one of these humans and bring them back to life, and you were to dress them up in a Burberry t-shirt and some fancy pants, you don't even have to get that fancy, but you were to put them on a subway, you wouldn't be able to recognize that they're from the 14th century. They would look like just like us, except that they're more attractive.